Just imagine, you live in an empire so large that it spans the entire known world. The streets are full of riches, people are always celebrating victories, and the empire seems indestructible. But then, suddenly, something happens. Money, which has always been the key to everything, starts to lose value. Suddenly, the things you used to buy with a small coin now cost a lot of them, and what was once cheap and easy to get becomes an impossible luxury. Now, imagine how you would feel if the money you have at home, which has always been reliable, suddenly became almost worthless. This is the dark secret of inflation, a problem that destroyed the Roman Empire, the greatest empire in history. Inflation, like an invisible monster, starts slowly but grows until it takes over everything. And before you know it, things are out of control. The Roman Empire, so strong and unbeatable, could not escape. And the worst part? It was not just the currency that collapsed. It was trust, order, and in the end, the empire itself that collapsed. Now, you're thinking, this can't happen to us, right? But are we really that safe? The history of Rome teaches us that without care, any empire can be brought down by something as simple as the money we use every day. Stay tuned, because what happened to Rome may be closer to home than we think. Check out if you're already subscribed so you don't miss these incredible revelations. The beginning of the money confusion. The history of the Roman Empire is one of the greatest that has ever existed. But if we look closer, we can see that even the greatest empire in history was not immune to the problems that arise when money loses its value. Let's travel back in time and see how the empire, which once dominated vast territories, faced a dilemma that still affects all economies today: inflation. At the height of the Roman Empire, the most important currency was the denarius. It was a symbol of wealth, stability, and power, a true foundation for the Roman economy. The denarius was not just any coin, but one made almost entirely of silver, which gave it a high value. With the denarius, the Romans could buy almost anything in their vast markets, which stretched from North Africa to Britain. If you were in Rome at that time, it was like having a prestige coin that both conveyed status and guaranteed purchasing power. But like all great stories, this silver coin would not remain untouched. As the Roman Empire expanded and the costs of maintaining it increased, especially in times of war, rulers began to look at the denarius differently. They saw an opportunity to make more coins without needing more silver, which seemed like a simple solution to a growing problem. The idea sounded good in theory, but in practice, it was a disaster. Emperors began to dilute the silver content of their coins, replacing some with cheaper metals like copper and brass. Thus, the production of coins became cheaper, but their value, well, it wasn't the same. The denarius, which used to be worth a lot, became worth much less. And this was just the beginning of what would become a major economic crisis. Imagine a scenario in which the currency you used to buy food, pay taxes, and conduct business was no longer worth anything. The impact of this was gigantic. And don't think that this was just a matter of small mistakes. The problem got worse as the Romans fought more and more wars, requiring more money to support their armed forces. The emperors, as a reflection of their financial difficulties, continued to produce more and more diluted coins, which generated brutal inflation. People began to realize that their coins no longer bought what they used to. Prices went up, but people's purchasing power fell every day. It seems like a scenario that could be easily solved, right? But in practice, the situation was much more out of control than anyone imagined. The government tried to keep producing more money, but this only created a vicious cycle of devaluation. Now, instead of using its money to improve the economy or help the Romans move forward, the empire was literally financing its own downfall. Sound familiar? The Roman Empire's history with its currency is a reflection of how modern economies can be affected by inflation. How do you think things might have been different if the Romans had found an alternative solution to their money problem? Let's talk about it in the comments. This story is not just about the past, but also about what can happen when we don't pay attention to what's happening with money around us. And that's just the beginning. What comes next is even more intriguing. How was the army, one of the most powerful forces in the Roman Empire, deeply involved in this story of monetary crisis? You'll be surprised by what happens next. Don't miss the next part, where we'll see how the loyalty of the Roman army was earned, and at the same time, how this further complicated the economy. Which part has caught your attention so far? Let us know in the comments. We want to hear your perspective. The army and the new problematic money. The Roman Empire, as impressive as it was, would not have lasted so long without the strength of its army. In such a vast and conflict-ridden empire, the loyalty of soldiers was crucial, and the emperors knew it. But there was a growing problem. Maintaining a strong, well-paid and committed army was not cheap, and the Romans were already facing an economic crisis. Rulers were increasingly hard-pressed to find the money to pay their troops, especially in times of war, when costs multiplied. The Emperor Septimius Severus, for example, one of the most important figures in the history of the Roman Empire, made a decision that seemed simple at the time, but had devastating consequences for the Roman economy. He began to raise the salaries of his soldiers to ensure their loyalty. And who could blame him? A strong army meant protection for the empire and a defense against constant external threats. But to pay for all this, Severus and his successors needed more and more resources, which were becoming increasingly scarce. That's when the Antoninian coin came into being. A new type of currency was introduced to pay the army, but its creation, although well-intentioned, only increased the empire's financial problems. The Antoninianus was supposed to be worth twice as much as the denarius, but in reality, it was worth almost nothing. It was a grandiose-looking coin, but its substance was highly questionable. The attempt to create a higher-value coin without a solid backing in precious metals was a false solution to a much larger problem. The Romans quickly realized that this currency was unreliable. Interestingly, the Antoninianus coin was a perfect reflection of the state of the empire. On the outside, it appeared imposing and full of power, but on the inside, it was corroded by a lack of real value. This only increased the distrust among the citizens, who began to realize that the currency was nothing more than an illusion. The government tried to hide the failure of its economy by creating new currencies and changing their values, but this caused the people to lose even more confidence. What happens when the population loses confidence in their monetary system? Chaos ensues. People began to view the Antoninianus as worthless, which created a spiral of devaluation and distrust that further sank the economy. As a result, the circulation of coins decreased and prices soared. This lack of trust in official currencies dealt a fatal blow to the Roman economic system. What had once been a reflection of wealth and stability became, over time, a symbol of the empire's decline. The relationship between the Roman economy and the army is a classic example of how the loyalty of troops should not be bought at any cost. Emperors were so focused on ensuring military strength that they failed to realize the long-term impact this would have on the empire's financial well-being. Now, an army that was supposed to be the driving force behind the empire's protection became part of a vicious cycle that weakened it internally. What do you think of this relationship between the army and the economy? Have you ever thought about how the pursuit of loyalty and power can often undermine the foundation of an empire? Leave your opinions in the comments, as the next part of this story will show how far this mistake could take the Romans. What comes next is even more surprising. How do you think the Romans tried to overcome the currency crisis? Are you ready to learn how inflation got out of control and how it affected everyone's lives, even basic commerce? The answer is closer than you think, so don't go away. Did you know this, or was it a surprise? Right here, what surprised you the most? Hyperinflation and total chaos. We have reached a critical point in the history of the Roman Empire, where the economic system was already in ruins. The currency, once a symbol of stability and prosperity, became a reflection of the internal tensions and mismanagement of the empire. Diocletian, who ascended to the throne at a time of great turmoil, was faced with an economy on the brink of collapse. Coins were no longer worth what they once were, and inflation was out of control. But what really happened when the currency stopped being useful for daily commerce? Let's find out. When Diocletian came to power, Rome's financial situation was at a tipping point. People were facing unsustainable price increases, and money could no longer buy what it used to. Imagine the scene. You walk into a Roman market to buy a loaf of bread, but instead of using a coin or a reasonable amount of cash, you need bags and bags of coins. What once cost a small fraction of your salary was now out of reach, even for the wealthiest citizens. The value of currency had fallen so much that people began to question whether there was any real value left in their coins. At this point, Diocletian, realizing that the crisis was spreading, tried to adopt a series of measures to contain the chaos. He introduced the maximum price edict, which was a desperate attempt to control inflation. The edict set fixed prices for essential goods, such as food and clothing, and imposed severe penalties for anyone who charged more than the stipulated price. The intention seemed good. If you can't control the value of money, control the prices of goods and services. But as we can imagine, this didn't work. The Edict of Diocletian did nothing but make the situation worse. Merchants and producers, seeing prices frozen, began to reduce production or sell their products on the black market, where prices were out of control. What was supposed to be a solution became nothing more than a loophole for more corruption and tax evasion. Imagine living in a society where food became so scarce and expensive that people began to trade goods directly with each other, instead of using coins. In the end, that's exactly what happened. The Roman monetary system collapsed to the point where the exchange of goods and services became more common than the use of coins. The market economy was replaced by a barter system, where the exchange of goods, such as wheat, clothing, and other essentials, replaced cash transactions. But what did this mean for ordinary people? What was the daily life of a Roman during hyperinflation? With the currency devalued and essential goods in short supply, the quality of life plummeted. The Romans began to experience a real decline in living standards. The middle class found itself impoverished, while the empire's elites often found themselves forced to seek solutions outside the financial system, accumulating wealth in land and property rather than in currency. Interestingly, this period of hyperinflation was not new to history. Over time, other empires and nations faced similar crises, such as Germany in the post-World War I period, with the famous hyperinflation of 1923. These historical events show that the devaluation of the currency can quickly turn a prosperous society into a community in collapse. In the case of Rome, the effect was devastating and, as we will see, had consequences for the stability of the empire itself. You may be wondering, how come a crisis of this magnitude was not resolved sooner? Why was Diocletian, with all his power, unable to prevent the empire from falling further and further into the financial abyss? This is a crucial question, and it is here that the true impact of inflation begins to be felt throughout the empire. Have you ever wondered what would have happened if the Roman economy had stabilized before it reached this critical point? The Roman Empire might still be standing today, or perhaps an even more profound transformation would have taken place. Now, when you think about your own reality, can we learn anything from this story? What would happen to our societies if one day our financial system failed in the same way? What would become of us if currencies suddenly lost their value and the economy fell into complete chaos? The history of the Romans has lessons that apply to this day, and we will discuss these lessons later. The Roman situation was one step away from becoming even more disastrous. In the next chapter, we will see how trust in institutions began to crumble once and for all. The empire was not only facing a monetary crisis, but also dealing with a weakening of popular confidence itself. What follows will reveal how the economy, left unchecked, brought much more serious consequences for the future of the empire. Be sure to follow along, because we are reaching the turning point in this story. Have you found it interesting so far? Leave a like to let me know that you like this type of content. The end of the empire. The collapse of an empire that once ruled vast territories and wielded unparalleled influence over the known world is a deeply thought-provoking tale. When we look back at the end of the Roman Empire, it is impossible not to notice that it was not just one single factor that led to its downfall. The monetary crisis, with its devastating consequences, was a central element in its destruction. The Roman Empire did not fall all at once, but slowly fragmented, like a great tree whose roots were undermined over time. The story of the collapse of Rome, with its impact on different areas of society, shows how economic instability can erode even the strongest foundations. Around 476 AD, the last emperor of the Western Roman Empire, Romulus Augustulus, was deposed by Odoacer, a barbarian chieftain. This event, although symbolic, does not represent the absolute end of Rome, as the Eastern Roman Empire, known as the Byzantine Empire, continued to exist for another 1,000 years. However, what happened in the West was a reflection of what was happening internally within the empire, where economic, social, and political problems had accumulated, creating a perfect breeding ground for collapse. As runaway inflation, currency devaluation, and shortages of essential goods spread, Roman trade collapsed. Cities that had once been vibrant centers of commerce and culture became shadows of their former splendor. People began to abandon their properties and seek refuge in safer areas, away from the incursions of Germanic invaders and internal tensions. The economy, once sustained by the use of currency, had become a simple exchange of goods, like an early medieval market. The Romans, for all their greatness, were now struggling to survive, like any other civilization in decline. But Rome's end was not immediate. Although the empire was formally deposed in 476 AD, the process of disintegration was gradual. For decades, Rome faced a series of invasions by barbarian tribes such as the Vandals, Visigoths, and Ostrogoths, who pillaged and plundered Roman cities. At the same time, Roman emperors, often more focused on maintaining control over their legions and ensuring their own survival, were unable to contain the growing external threat. Corruption and political instability within Rome also contributed to weakening central authority, making it increasingly vulnerable to attack. Taxes began to weigh increasingly heavily on citizens, and attempts to regain control over the economy and currency proved futile. Roman currency, once the bedrock of prosperity, had become worthless, and the Roman Empire found itself unable to finance even its military, much less its infrastructure. The empire's borders became increasingly difficult to defend, and Old Rome, a symbol of greatness, became a fragmented territory. In this scenario, the deposition of Romulus Augustulus was the final straw. Odoacer, the Germanic leader who deposed the last emperor, did not attempt to restore the Roman Empire, but established the Ostrogothic kingdom in Italy. This marked the end of the Western Roman Empire as a unified political entity. What remained of the empire was fragmented, with various tribes and kingdoms taking control of the former Roman provinces. The unity that had once made Rome unbeatable gave way to a division that ultimately left Roman greatness felt only in ruins and in the memories of later generations. It is hard not to think of the tragedy of this transition. Rome, a city that was once the center of the known world, went from being the capital of an empire to a shadow of its former splendor. The collapse of the Roman economy had a ripple effect. It was not just the currency that lost its value. The very social and cultural structures that sustained the empire began to crumble. The increasingly impoverished population found itself without the resources to support their families and communities, while the Roman elite largely sought to protect themselves rather than restore Rome to its former glory. Perhaps most curiously, the end of Rome was not the end of history. Rome lives on in its ideas, art, architecture, and culture. Its legacy endured even after the fall of the empire, influencing civilizations that followed. And when we reflect on what led to the fall of the Roman Empire, we are forced to ask ourselves, what can we learn from the mistakes of the past? How is a strong and stable economy essential to sustaining a nation's prosperity? Finally, when we look at Rome, we see that the same lessons about inflation, currency, and trust are still relevant to us today. What do you think Rome could have done to avoid this fate? Could the empire have saved itself at some point, or was its downfall inevitable? Leave a comment below and share your thoughts on how economics shapes the future of great civilizations. Your insights are an essential part of this conversation. This was the end of an era, but the story of Rome is timeless, and the lessons it left us continue to teach us about the complexities of economics, power, and the downfall of great civilizations. But here's the takeaway. What happened to Rome is not something that happened in the past. The impact of an economy out of control, with no trust in currency and without a stable system, is a lesson we need to understand. You, me, all of us are part of this story. Everything we see around us, the value of money, trade, the economy of a country, all of this can change if we don't know how to deal with these problems. So stay tuned. It's not just ancient history. This could happen again if we're not careful. So whenever you think about the value of money or how things work around you, remember the Roman Empire. Today's economy may be much stronger, but the lesson of Rome never goes away. Did you like this content? Leave a comment and share what you think could have saved Rome. Would you have done anything differently? Let's talk about it in the comments.